There's a silence in the Arctic that feels alive. It hums softly beneath the frozen crust of the world, a vibration so deep that explorers once swore they could feel it through the soles of their boots. To most, it is simply the wind, sculpting the endless snow into dunes and ridges. But to those who listen longer, who stay beyond the comfort of daylight, it sounds like something else, as if the Earth itself remembers a time before men named the stars. The Arctic has always been a paradox, a place of stillness and violence, of deathly cold and living light. In winter, darkness reigns for months, broken only by the slow dance of auroras that ripple across the sky like veils of green fire. In summer, the sun refuses to set, circling endlessly, refusing to let the world rest. And somewhere between these two extremes, legends were born, tales of hidden people beneath the ice, of gods who walked across frozen seas, of voices that still whisper from the glaciers. For centuries, the Arctic was marked on maps as terra incognita, the unknown land. Even as late as the 19th century, explorers dreamed of civilizations hidden at the top of the world. Some believed the North Pole concealed an entrance to a hollow Earth. Others imagined an ancient race that thrived before the last ice age and vanished without a trace. Most scientists dismissed these ideas as fantasy, and yet the Arctic kept its secrets well. It swallowed entire ships, erased footprints overnight, and guarded artifacts that defied explanation. But long before maps and compasses, before sailors or scholars, the people of the Arctic had already given names to the mysteries around them. The Inuit spoke of the Inuit, giants who lived in the north before their ancestors arrived. The Sámi of Scandinavia told of the Stalu, a being half-human, half-spirit, that stalked the tundra. The Chukchi in Siberia believed that the northern lights were souls traveling between worlds. And scattered among these legends is one recurring idea, that the ice was once alive with civilization, and that fragments of it still echo through time. According to old Greenlandic songs, there was a land beyond the horizon called Kalasernit, the shining shores. It was said to be warm even in winter, its valleys hidden beneath thick clouds of mist. People there knew how to speak with animals, and their hunters never returned empty-handed. When the great cold came, the songs say, the shining shores sang beneath the ice, and only the aurora remained as a bridge between their world and ours. Centuries later, when the first European whalers reached Greenland's coast, they wrote about the same strange glow, the shimmer that moved across the night sky, as if remembering something. It is easy to dismiss such stories as metaphor, poetic inventions of a people trying to survive in an unforgiving land. Yet when archaeologists began to study Arctic prehistory, they discovered traces of human presence older and more complex than expected. Sites in northern Siberia revealed advanced tools and structures dating back almost 30,000 years, far earlier than most believed humans could survive that far north. On Arctic islands once thought uninhabitable, scientists found bone dwellings and carved idols of mammoths and spirits, suggesting a symbolic culture as rich as any found further south. And so a new question emerged. What if the legends of the ice were not entirely symbolic? What if they preserved, in poetic form, the memory of real people, cultures erased by climate, by sea, by time? Standing on the tundra today, the idea does not seem impossible. Beneath the snow lie layers of frozen soil older than civilization itself. As glaciers retreat, they reveal bones, wooden tools, sometimes even entire settlements, perfectly preserved, as if time itself had taken a deep breath and only now exhaled. Each discovery shifts our understanding of what the Arctic once was. It is no longer an empty wilderness at the edge of the world, but perhaps one of its earliest centers of myth and meaning. The farther north one goes, the stronger that feeling becomes. Scientists describe it as isolation. Writers call it awe. But the Inuit have another word, sila, the breath of the world. It means air, weather, spirit, and consciousness all at once. It is what moves the wind, what gives animals instinct, what keeps humans connected to the land. And in many northern myths, sila is not just the force of nature, it is memory itself. It remembers those who came before, and it speaks through the snow. According to one ancient tale, every snowflake is a message, a fragment of thought frozen in time, falling from a sky to remind the living of what was lost. When you walk through a blizzard, the elders say, you walk through the whispers of your ancestors. If that is true, then perhaps the Arctic has been speaking to us all along. We just forgot how to listen. And that is where our story begins, in the silence between the wind and the sky, in the space where science and legend overlap, and the ice holds both truth and imagination in equal measure. Because somewhere beneath those endless fields of white lies the memory of a civilization forgotten by history, but not by the earth. From above, the Arctic looks like a vast mirror, an endless sea of white and silver, carved by wind and time into patterns so intricate they resemble veins beneath the skin of the earth. Yet beneath that shimmering expanse lies a geography that is far from uniform. There are mountains hidden under the ice, valleys deeper than the Grand Canyon, and ancient riverbeds that once carried the lifeblood of civilizations long gone. Even now, satellites reveal traces of what seem like ridges and shorelines beneath the polar cap, signs that this frozen crown of the planet was not always as lifeless as it seems. Tens of thousands of years ago, during the last ice age, much of the Arctic was not covered in glaciers. Instead, it was a cold steppe, a dry, windswept grassland teeming with mammoths, bison, and early humans. Archaeologists call it the Mammoth Steppe, and it stretched from France to Alaska, connecting continents through what we now call the Bering Land Bridge. It was not a bridge in the usual sense, but a vast expanse of land, hundreds of kilometers wide, linking Asia and North America. And across that land, people traveled, hunters, families, and perhaps entire cultures moving with the rhythm of ice and season. It is there, between Siberia and Alaska, that the roots of Arctic myth seem to grow. For when the glaciers retreated and the sea returned, the land bridge vanished beneath the waves, cutting those people off from one another. But their stories remained, echoes that evolved on both sides of the ocean, reshaped by language and landscape. Among the Inuit of North America and the Chukchi of Siberia, we still find tales that mirror each other. Stories of spirits beneath the sea, skywalkers who guided hunters, and the first humans born from ice and stone. To the west, in northern Scandinavia, the Sámi people developed their own cosmology, one woven tightly with the rhythm of nature. They saw the world as layered, the realm of the living, the world below, and the luminous world above. Between them stretched the axis of life, often imagined as a great tree, or a reindeer's antler reaching into the stars. The northern lights, in their view, were not just light. They were energy, the visible pulse of that cosmic order. To whistle at them, it was said, could draw their attention and their wrath. Thousands of miles away, across the polar ocean, the Inuit spoke of Sedna, the sea goddess who ruled over the creatures of the deep. Once a human woman, she fell into the freezing ocean and transformed, her hair becoming seaweed, her fingers turning into seals and whales. She was both cruel and kind, bestowing bounty when respected, vengeance when neglected. Hunters would offer her combs and songs, hoping to appease her before each journey. This balance between reverence and fear runs through all Arctic myth. Nature is both mother and judge, giver and taker. The land itself enforces that truth. Even in the modern Arctic, survival demands harmony. The smallest mistake, a forgotten match, a misplaced step, can end a life. Perhaps that is why the stories here feel less like entertainment and more like agreements with the universe. They are contracts between the human and the elemental. Each myth is a code of conduct wrapped in poetry. How to hunt, when to rest, what to respect. Through them, generations learned not just how to live, but how to belong. But the Arctic was never isolated from the wider world. Long before modern nations drew borders, the polar circle was a crossroads. Trade routes stretched along the coasts, carrying walrus ivory, furs, and stories from Greenland to Siberia. In Norse sagas, we read of voyages northward to lands of eternal night, where giants and spirits dwelled. Some historians now believe those tales may have been inspired by encounters with Arctic peoples, the first glimpses of cultures adapted to conditions the Norse could barely imagine. To the Norse, these northern dwellers were something more than human. The Skrælingjar, beings of great endurance, perhaps touched by the gods. When the Viking explorers reached the edges of Greenland around the 10th century, they brought with them not just ships, but mythologies of their own. Odin, Thor, and the frost giants of Jotunheim. It was here, under the same auroras that guided the Inuit shamans, that two worlds of legend briefly met. The Norse saw the Arctic as the gateway to the realm of giants, the cold frontier where chaos began. The Inuit saw these foreign visitors as men of fire and noise, who carved the sea with metal dragons. Each regarded the other with awe, and somewhere in that meeting, their myths intertwined, feeding the growing idea of the Arctic as the border between reality and the unknown. Later explorers, European, Russian, and American, would inherit that image. In the 16th and 17th centuries, maps of the North Pole often depicted it as a whirlpool of water surrounded by mountains, with a glowing rock at its center. That central rock, cartographers claimed, was the magnetic pole itself, the mountain of lodestone that pulled every compass north. This vision, born from a blend of misunderstanding and imagination, gave rise to the belief in a polar paradise, a hidden world within the ice where time flowed differently. The myth of Hyperborea, the northern utopia mentioned by Greek writers like Herodotus, was reborn, now placed at the very top of the world. Hyperborea, according to the ancients, was a land beyond the north wind, a place where the sun shone for half the year and the people lived in peace and harmony. No sickness touched them, no wars scarred their soil. The Greeks believed the god Apollo himself traveled there each winter, retreating to a realm of light while the rest of the world lay cold. It was a metaphor, perhaps, for renewal and retreat, but for later mystics and explorers, it became something literal. They searched for its entrance among the Arctic islands, in Greenland's fjords, even beneath the polar ice itself. In this convergence of myth and exploration, the Arctic became both a map and a mirror. Each culture projected its hopes and fears onto the ice. Paradise for some, punishment for others, revelation for a few. To the indigenous peoples, it remained simply home, a living, breathing world of spirits and ancestors. But to those who came from afar, it became a testing ground for the imagination, a place where science reached its limits and story began to take over. Perhaps that is the essence of the Arctic's enduring mystery. It is not just a place of cold, it is a place of reflection. Every visitor sees themselves there, stripped of comfort, confronted by the vastness of existence. And in that confrontation, myth is born again. If you listen closely to the oldest Arctic stories, they rarely begin with "once upon a time." Instead, they begin with silence, an endless white horizon before the first dawn. Time in these traditions is not linear. It loops like the seasons, circling back upon itself, always returning to the beginning. And at that beginning, before there were men or reindeer, before snow even had a name, there was breath. In almost every Arctic creation myth, life begins not with fire or light, but with a breath drawn into the cold. The Inuit word sila describes that perfectly. It is the air that moves through all things, the living awareness of the world. According to the elders, Sila dreamed of companionship and exhaled it into being. From that breath came the first shapes, ice, stone, and sky. The stones hardened into mountains, the ice melted into rivers, and the sky split open to let in light. Human beings, the legend says, were made last, formed from a mixture of snow and shadow, so that they would remember both warmth and cold. Across the ocean, in the Sámi traditions of northern Europe, there is another breath, one belonging to the wind spirit Bigolmai. He carries two shovels, one for stirring up storms, the other for calming them. To the Sámi, the world was sung into existence by wind and sound, not by war or fire. And so their shamans, the Noated, would use drums painted with circles and symbols, believing that rhythm itself could mirror the heartbeat of creation. Each beat called back to that first breath, the sound that brought the world alive. In Chukchi myth, the creation begins under the sea. There, in the dark water, a great woman known as Number gave birth to the first beings. She placed them on floating ice and taught them to walk upon it. But one day, the ice began to melt, and the people scattered in every direction. Some went south and found warmth, others stayed behind, learning to build from bone and snow. Number then sent spirits to guard them, creatures of light who danced in the sky, so that the humans would never forget the path home. Thus, the northern lights became both compass and memory. It is remarkable how similar these myths are, though they come from lands separated by thousands of miles. Across the circumpolar world, from Greenland to Siberia, the same themes repeat. The birth of life from air and water, the sanctity of breath, the belief that humans are extensions of the natural world, not rulers over it. Where other cultures imagined gods descending from mountains or heavens, the Arctic peoples saw divinity rise from the landscape itself. The world was not a stage for humans. It was a living being in which they played a part. The earliest known recorders of these stories, anthropologists, missionaries, explorers, often misunderstood them. To European ears, the myths seemed primitive, fragments of superstition preserved by isolation. But when linguists began to study the structure of Inuit and Sámi languages, they found something extraordinary. Many ancient words contain built-in relationships, nouns that shift form depending on whether something is alive, still, or moving. The grammar itself reflects a worldview where everything, stone, star, storm, has agency. It is as if the Arctic tongue still remembers that first exhalation, that sila that animates the universe. Some of these myths survived through oral poetry. In Greenland, hunters would recite long chants before traveling on sea ice. These chants were both spiritual armor and navigational code, containing secret markers of tides, stars, and safe crossings. In Siberia, epic storytellers known as kailniki performed for nights on end, telling of shapeshifters, sky daughters, and journeys to the land of the dead. Each generation added its own verse, turning memory into living art. The stories were not fixed, they breathed, like the land itself. But within these tales also hides a deep memory, an echo that may point to real events buried beneath the ice. Modern genetic studies show that humans have lived in the far north far longer than once believed. Traces of ancient DNA found in Arctic Siberia date back nearly 30,000 years. Even more astonishing, cultural artifacts, bone needles, musical instruments, carved figurines, appear to share patterns across continents. It is as if, in the deep past, there was a connected world stretching across the Arctic Rim, a network of migration and myth. Some researchers now suspect that the idea of a lost northern civilization, found in so many later legends, may stem from that forgotten age. When sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age, entire landscapes vanished under melting glaciers. What had once been homeland became seabed. For those who lived there, it must have felt like the world itself was dying. And so they told stories, to preserve what was lost. Over generations, memory became myth, and myth became the map of a drowned history. Among the Inuit, one ancient tale speaks of the people below the ice, a race that lived in warmth beneath the glaciers. They were said to be wise, kind, and skilled in song. But they feared the sky, for they knew it would one day fall. When the great freeze came, they retreated deeper, leaving only their voices behind. Sometimes, when hunters pressed their ears to the ice, they swore they could hear singing beneath it, a sound like the echo of whales mixed with human breath. To this day, elders in Nunavut tell children not to listen too long, for if you do, they say, the ice might remember your name. It is tempting to interpret such stories metaphorically. But then, nature itself begins to whisper coincidences. In Greenland, scientists recently discovered massive subglacial lakes, hidden pockets of liquid water sealed beneath kilometers of ice. Some of them are as large as cities. Could ancient people, seeing light reflected through those frozen layers, have imagined worlds below? Or did the stories come first, shaping how later generations perceived what they saw? Between archaeology and legend, there's a space that feels almost sacred, a twilight where truth wears the mask of myth. Perhaps the first storytellers of the North understood something modern science is only beginning to rediscover, that the earth is not silent, that it records everything, and that stories are how we listen back. And so the myths continue to evolve, passed from campfire to campfire, carried across drifting ice floes, translated through breath and song. They survived colonization, language loss, and modernity because they were not just stories, they were survival itself. Each legend taught a way to live, a way to remember. And beneath them all lies that same quiet promise, that something ancient still moves under the ice, waiting to be heard again. In the Arctic, Gods do not sit on thrones or rule from clouds. They walk, swim, and breathe among the living. They are not distant forces, but presences that move through wind, light, and silence. To understand Arctic mythology is to understand that divinity here is woven into every gesture of nature. The gods are not above the world, they are the world itself. Among the Inuit, there is no single creator, but a web of spirits who maintain balance. Foremost among them is Sedna, the Lady of the Deep. Her story changes from coast to coast, yet its heart is always the same. She is both victim and sovereign, human and divine. In one version, she is a young woman forced into marriage with a mysterious birdman. When her father tries to rescue her, the enraged husband conjures a storm. In fear, the father throws Sedna into the sea, cutting off her fingers as she clings to the boat. From her severed fingers emerge the seals, walruses, and whales, the lifeblood of Arctic survival. And Sedna sinks into the deep, becoming their guardian. When hunters fail to respect the balance of nature, she tangles their lines and stills the sea. Only through ritual combing of her hair by shamans can her anger be soothed. To those who live by the ocean, Sedna is not a distant goddess, but a neighbor. She is the reason a whale surfaces when food is scarce, or the reason storms appear without warning. Her myth carries the ethics of gratitude and restraint. Take what you need, honor what you take. In that way, Sedna is both the mother of abundance and the conscience of the sea. But the world beneath the waves is only half the Arctic cosmos. Above the tundra moves the realm of Sila, the invisible breath of existence. Sila is not a person, not even a god in the conventional sense, but a consciousness spread through air and weather. It has no temple but the sky itself. When children laugh in the snow, Sila listens. When the wind rises and hunters are caught in fog, Sila reminds them of humility. In some tales, it speaks through the cries of birds or the shimmer of the aurora. It cannot be seen, only felt, an idea that modern science, in its own way, echoes when it speaks of the earth as a self-regulating organism. Where the sea and sky meet, there is another presence, Tarkek, the moon man. He is Sedna's counterpart, both hunter and lover, watcher of tides and time. According to Inuit legend, Tarkek once lived among humans, but he fell in love with his sister, the Sun Woman, and fled into the sky to escape shame. Since then, he chases her endlessly, their pursuit creating the cycle of day and night. When the moon darkens, he is resting. When it shines, he is searching. His story, though tragic, explains the rhythm of the heavens and the moral line between desire and restraint. In a land where light and darkness can last for months, Tarkek and the sun are more than celestial bodies. They are symbols of balance, of pursuit without possession. Travel west to Scandinavia, and you find echoes of these cosmic twins in the Sámi pantheon. There the sun is Bivi, a goddess of warmth, sanity, and life. Each winter solstice, when the sun disappears for weeks, the Sámi used to sacrifice white reindeer to Bivi, hanging its bones in the shape of a wheel, a plea for her return. When she finally rose again, they celebrated with songs thanking her for saving the people from the darkness that drives minds astray. Bivi's daughter, Biviniaida, was said to travel the sky in a chariot of reindeer antlers, spreading light over the snow. To this day, some Sámi families still turn their faces to the first sunrise of the year in silent gratitude. It is a ritual older than writing, a moment when myth and astronomy align perfectly. The Sámi also speak of Stalu, a creature who embodies the boundary between human and beast. He is described as a giant, sometimes a fool, sometimes a cannibal, but always a warning. To mock others, to take without permission, to lose respect for the spirits of the land. All these acts risk becoming like Stalu. He is greed personified, the shadow that follows anyone who forgets humility. And yet, like all Arctic myths, even the monstrous carries wisdom. Without Stalu, there would be no contrast, no reminder of what it means to live in harmony. On the Siberian side, among the Nenets and Chukchi, we meet gods of wind and reindeer, of sky and fire. Number, the supreme being, is said to live above the clouds, shaping destinies with his breath. But his counterpart, Na, rules the underworld of shadows. The two are not enemies, They are partners in a dialogue that never ends. When one creates, the other dissolves. When one sleeps, the other wakes. Together, they maintain the eternal pulse of existence, a philosophy astonishingly close to the yin and yang of Eastern traditions, yet born from frozen tundra thousands of miles away. Even the animals in these myths hold sacred meaning. The raven, common across all northern cultures, is both trickster and creator. Among the Tlingit and Inuit, it is the one who stole the sun and brought it to humankind. In Sámi tales, it guides shamans through dream flights. Its black wings represent the mystery of knowledge, dangerous when misused, divine when understood. To kill a raven without cause was once considered an invitation to misfortune, for the bird might be listening, remembering, judging. Another symbol shared across the Arctic is the reindeer, the axis of survival and spirituality alike. For nomadic peoples, it is food, clothing, movement, and myth combined. In ritual songs, the reindeer is often described as the cosmic traveler who carries prayers from earth to heaven. Its antlers are seen as the tree of life, branching toward the stars, mirroring the shape of constellations. When the aurora ripples through the sky, it is said that the reindeer's soul is running across the heavens, reminding humanity that every journey has both an earthly and celestial path. Even the polar bear, so feared and revered, occupies a divine place. Among the Inuit, it is called Nanak, the great wanderer. Hunters once believed that to take its life was to marry its spirit. They would dress its skull in fine clothes and speak to it gently, thanking it for the gift of survival. In those gestures lies the ancient logic of Arctic spirituality, reverence born from necessity, faith born from the cold. What is striking is how these myths, despite belonging to distant peoples, echo one another with uncanny precision. They share moral codes, cosmic symbols, and even similar imagery of transformation and duality. It is as if the Arctic itself, through its light, its silence, its extremes, shaped the human mind into seeing the same truths again and again. Science may call this convergent culture, but the poets of the North might say, the ice dreams the same dream through many tongues. And perhaps that is why the Arctic pantheon feels different from those of warmer lands. There is no hierarchy, no clear division between God and mortal. Instead, there is conversation. The wind answers the hunter, the sea tests the heart, the stars remember the path home. And every creature, from raven to whale, speaks in the same vast language, the language of survival, respect, and return. The sea is never quiet in the Arctic. Even when it appears still, it breathes beneath the ice, rising and falling with a rhythm that feels almost human. The people of the North say that rhythm belongs to Sedna, the heartbeat of the deep. Her story is as vast as the ocean itself, retold for 1,000 years in whispers, songs, and dreams. And though every version differs, they all begin with a daughter, a father, and a storm. Long ago, before snow had names and before the sea had salt, there lived a young woman who refused to marry. Her father, a skilled hunter, had many suitors for her, men who owned fine kayaks, men who sang her praises, men who promised warmth in winter. But Sedna, proud and independent, rejected them all. I belong to the wind, she said, not to a man. Her defiance embarrassed her father, for in their small village, every alliance mattered. So when a stranger appeared on the shore, a tall figure cloaked in feathers, speaking in a voice that shimmered like sunlight on water, her father was quick to accept his offer. The stranger promised Sedna a life of comfort, of rich furs and endless food. Reluctantly, she agreed and sailed with him across the bay. But when they reached his island, the illusion broke. The stranger was no man at all, but a great seabird spirit, and his home was nothing more than a nest of bones and wind. Each day he brought her fish instead of meat, feathers instead of warmth. Sedna cried to the waves, but they only echoed her sorrow. And far away, her father heard those cries in his dreams. Guilt struck him like a spear. He took his kayak and paddled across the stormy waters to rescue his daughter. When he arrived, he saw her thin and trembling, her eyes wild with anger and grief. He helped her into his boat, and they began to flee. But the bird husband soon discovered their escape. He rose into the air, flapping his wings until the sky turned black. The wind screamed. The sea heaved. A storm unlike any other swallowed them whole. The father rowed desperately, waves breaking over his head. The kayak tilted, and he feared they would both drown. In terror, he did the unthinkable. He pushed Sedna overboard to save himself. She clung to the side, crying out his name, and when her fingers gripped the edge, he struck them with his paddle, cutting them off one by one. Each finger fell into the churning water, and from them sprang the great creatures of the ocean, the seal, the walrus, the narwhal, and the whale. Sedna sank beneath the waves, her hair fanning around her like black seaweed, her body merging with the cold. But she did not die. She descended into the shadowy realm at the bottom of the sea, where light cannot reach. There she built a palace of bones and coral, and became the ruler of all marine life. The whale sang her name, the seals danced in her honor, yet her heart, wounded by betrayal, remained cold and heavy. When humans grew greedy and disrespected the balance of the sea, Sedna withdrew her gifts. The hunters found their nets empty, the ice brittle, the storms unending. Then the shamans were called. It was said that only they could journey to Sedna's domain to calm her wrath. Through trance and song, they would descend through the layers of the ocean, their spirits swimming past luminous fish and drifting bones. When they reached her, they would find her tangled in her own hair, long strands matted with the sins of mankind. They would comb it gently, singing apologies on behalf of their people. If Sedna was moved, she would open her eyes, and the sea would grow calm again. If not, the world above would freeze in silence. To this day, Inuit elders teach this story as more than legend. It is a moral law, disguised as myth. It warns of greed, of arrogance, of forgetting the source of one's survival. Sedna's pain is the pain of the earth itself, a reminder that every gift taken without gratitude wounds the giver. In modern times, when climate scientists speak of warming oceans and vanishing ice, some storytellers quietly repeat Sedna's tale. They say she is angry once more, shaking the seas to remind humanity that she is still here, beneath us, waiting to be heard. Yet Sedna's story is not only tragedy, it is also transformation. She begins as a woman trapped by choices not her own, and becomes the spirit who sustains an entire world. Her suffering turns to power, her silence to song. And in that journey lies one of the oldest truths in Arctic mythology, that even in despair, there is creation, that even from loss, new life can rise. Anthropologists note how this myth resonates far beyond the Arctic. Across cultures, the sea is often personified as a mother or a betrayed woman. The Greek Amphitrite, the Polynesian Hina, the Japanese goddess Benzaden. But only Sedna's myth turns mutilation into genesis. In her pain, she gives birth to abundance. In her isolation, she creates community. That paradox, cruelty giving rise to compassion, is at the heart of Northern philosophy. The ice teaches it daily. Break it, and it yields water. Respect it, and it carries you home. For centuries, sailors who crossed Arctic waters would speak of strange sounds under the hulls of their ships, soft moans, echoes, or the rhythm of a heartbeat in the deep. Most dismissed it as shifting ice, but a few whispered that it was Sedna herself, testing the hearts of men who entered her domain. Those who felt pity would return safely. Those who mocked the legend often vanished without trace. And so the myth endures, surviving every age of discovery and disbelief. It is retold not because people fear her, but because they recognize themselves in her. Every betrayal, every act of greed, every moment of forgiveness echoes in the sound of her waves. In the end, Sedna's story is not about punishment, it is about balance. The ocean remembers what humans forget, that all life, no matter how fragile, is connected by the same invisible current. As winter falls and the sea seals itself again beneath glass, the people still sing to her. A quiet hum, passed through generations. It rises into the cold night, mingling with the sound of breaking ice. A lullaby for a goddess who is never truly gone, only waiting beneath the surface, dreaming of the day humanity remembers the old songs. There are nights in the Arctic when the sky forgets to be dark. It begins quietly, just a faint shimmer along the horizon, like a breath on glass. Then the air itself seems to awaken. Waves of green and violet rise, folding and unfolding in silence, as if unseen hands were painting the heavens anew. These are the northern lights, aurora borealis to science, but to those who have lived beneath them for millennia, they are far more than a spectacle. They are a language of light, an ancient bridge between worlds. The Inuit call them Iksarniat, the ones who play ball. According to legend, they are the souls of the dead, tossing a walrus skull back and forth across the sky. When the lights move fast, the game is lively. When they drift slowly, the spirits are resting. Children were told never to whistle at the aurora, for doing so would call the spirits down, who might take the voice and the soul of anyone mocking their play. So families watched in reverent silence, listening to the faint crackle that sometimes accompanied the glow, believing it to be the laughter of ancestors carried by the wind. Far across the Arctic Ocean, the Sámi people held a similar awe. They named the light Squavsahas, the light you can hear. They believed the aurora contained divine power, perhaps the energy of Bivi, the sun goddess, or the breath of departed warriors. To raise your hand or wave beneath the lights was considered deeply disrespectful, even dangerous. The Sámi lowered their heads, speaking in whispers. To them, the aurora was not entertainment, it was a visitation. In Chukchi tradition, the lights were the pathways of the dead traveling between realms. When a person died, their soul ascended on a column of light until it joined the dancing glow above. From there, it could look down upon the living, offering protection to those who remembered its name. But if the living forgot to honor the dead, the light would dim, and storms would follow. Thus, remembrance was not just sentiment, it was survival. These myths are not mere curiosities of culture. They reveal a profound intuition about connection. For the aurora truly does bridge heaven and earth. Science now tells us that the lights are born from solar winds, streams of charged particles that travel millions of kilometers from the sun, colliding with Earth's magnetic field. When they strike atoms high in the atmosphere, they release energy as light, green from oxygen, purple from nitrogen. What ancient people saw as spirits dancing were, in fact, messages from the sun itself, written in color across the sky. The universe was speaking to them, and they answered in story. But myths often tell truths that science only later names. Long before modern instruments, Arctic shamans believed that the aurora could affect the human mind. They spoke of nights when hunters lost all fear beneath the glow, moving with strange clarity, their senses sharpened. Today, we know that geomagnetic storms caused by solar activity can indeed influence mood and brain chemistry, altering circadian rhythms, even inspiring euphoria. So when elders said the lights carried emotion, they were not wrong. They were describing what they felt in their blood. The Greenlandic Inuit have a gentler version of the legend. They say the lights are torches carried by the spirits of stillborn children, lighting the way for travelers lost in snow. Each color represents a voice: green for peace, red for warning, blue for forgiveness. To see the lights ripple above one's camp was to know that the dead still cared for the living. Many families, even now, leave a small lamp burning through the polar night, not to ward off darkness, but to answer it. Other versions are more playful. Some say the lights are the fires of sky hunters, chasing herds of celestial animals. Others claim they are reflections of mighty glaciers in the world above. There are even tales of the aurora as living beings, serpents or ribbons of cloth, that whisper when touched. Across languages, across continents, the same pattern emerges: movement, memory, and light. In every culture touched by the Arctic, the aurora is never random. It always means something. In the 18th century, when European explorers witnessed the northern lights for the first time, many were terrified. They described them as curtains of flame and armies of spirits in battle. Some believed the phenomenon heralded the end of the world. Others tried to explain it through alchemy and divine signs. It was not until the rise of modern physics that the aurora's nature was understood. But even then, the mystery refused to die. For those who have seen it in person, no explanation seems enough. There is something alive in that silence. Indigenous storytellers understood this instinctively. They said the lights respond to emotion. A joyful heart makes them dance, a sorrowful one stills them. To stand beneath them is to be seen, not as an individual, but as part of the breathing world. That feeling of belonging, of being acknowledged by the cosmos, is what draws people north again and again. And perhaps that is why, despite centuries of scientific progress, we still look up in awe. We still hush our voices. We still listen. One old tale from Nunavut tells of a young girl who asked her grandmother where the lights came from. The old woman smiled and said, "They are the old ones playing again." "But why do they move so fast?" the girl asked. "So they do not freeze," the grandmother replied. "Even spirits must keep warm." It is a simple exchange, but in it lies the gentle humor that threads through Arctic wisdom, the understanding that even mystery has warmth. In Sámi joik songs, ancestral chants that blend melody with storytelling, the aurora is often personified as a messenger, a friend, a warning, a reminder. When the joiker sings, the rhythm mimics the pulsing of the lights, rising and falling with invisible energy. Modern musicians still record these joiks under the open sky, letting the aurora flicker above their instruments. It is said that sound and light meet halfway, completing a circle older than time. For those who have spent a winter beneath it, the aurora becomes something personal. It marks memories, the birth of a child, the death of an elder, the return of the sun after months of night. It becomes a diary written across the heavens, where every color means something only the heart can read. Perhaps that is the greatest power of the aurora. It reminds humans that beauty and impermanence are the same thing, that light exists only because of darkness, that even silence can speak. When scientists today photograph the northern lights from orbit, they describe them in technical terms: electrons, magnetospheres, energy flux. Yet the images they capture, green fire swirling above blue earth, still look like myth reborn. Each one seems to whisper that the ancestors were right after all. The sky is alive. The universe does remember. And somewhere between physics and poetry, the old gods are still playing their endless game. The Arctic speaks through symbols. Its languages are not only human tongues, but the movements of light, the flight of birds, the circles of the sun across the horizon. For those who have lived here for generations, every pattern carries meaning. To outsiders, it might seem like superstition. To the people of the North, it is literacy, a way of reading the living world. Among the Inuit, few materials were wasted, and each held spiritual value. Bone, ivory, sinew, and stone were not inert matter. They were fragments of former lives. To carve them was to awaken memory. A hunter shaping a walrus tusk into a tool would whisper to it, asking permission, explaining its purpose. When finished, he might mark it with small circles, symbols representing eyes or stars, to ensure that the object sees the path ahead. Every carving was both practical and prayerful, bridging survival and reverence. One of the oldest Arctic symbols is the circle. It is everywhere, in the sun, in the moon, in the tracks of sled dogs, in the layout of villages. It represents continuity, community, and the endless return of seasons. In Sámi cosmology, the world itself was often drawn as a circle divided into three: the world above, the world of humans, and the world below. The Noiti, the shaman, traveled between them by beating a circular drum, its sound mimicking the heartbeat of creation. Even the reindeer's antlers, with their branching loops, were seen as living maps of these realms, connecting sky and earth. Another powerful symbol is the spiral, found in carvings across Greenland, northern Norway, and Siberia. It signifies breath, motion, and the unseen. Some scholars believe it represents the aurora's dance, others, the path of the soul through birth and death. To the Inuit, a spiral drawn on snow could mean safe journey, or circle back home. It is both a warning and a blessing, a shape that refuses to end. Animals themselves were symbols long before they were words. The raven, for example, is the first messenger. In myths from Alaska to Siberia, he brings light to the world by stealing the sun from a jealous spirit. But he is also a trickster, a teacher who uses mischief to reveal truth. When he drops a shell, it becomes the first human. When he laughs, storms shift direction. His duality, wise and foolish, creative and destructive, mirrors the Arctic's own contradictions, brutal yet nurturing, empty yet full. The reindeer embodies another kind of symbolism, endurance and movement. It is the pulse of the tundra, guiding nomadic peoples across thousands of miles. The Sámi see the reindeer as sacred kin, and its antlers as a map of cosmic order. Each tine points toward a different world, one for the ancestors, one for dreams, one for the unborn. To take a reindeer's life without ritual was unthinkable. It was customary to sprinkle snow into the animal's mouth, symbolizing a final drink, and to thank it aloud for its gift. Even in death, the reindeer was a companion on the long road of existence. Among sea hunters, the seal holds another layer of meaning. It is a symbol of transformation and sacrifice, creatures that live between worlds, both on ice and in water. In many Inuit tales, seals are human souls who chose the sea. To see one rise through a hole in the ice is to glimpse the border between life and spirit. Hunters would never mock or waste it. They believed every seal carried the memory of a relative returned in a different form. Numbers, too, carry weight in the frozen north. The number 3 appears again and again. 3 realms of existence, 3 breaths of life, 3 tasks to test the worthy. In shamanic rituals, drums were often struck 3 times to open the path between worlds. In certain Siberian tribes, new fires were lit with 3 sparks, each one representing air, water, and earth, the triad of survival. The number 7 is also sacred, symbolizing completion. 7 days of darkness before the sun's return. 7 stars of the Big Dipper, known as the reindeer harness in some Arctic tongues. 7 notes in the joik scale, mirroring the heartbeat of the land. But perhaps the most profound symbol of all is light itself. In the Arctic, light is not constant, it must be earned. Months of darkness teach patience. The brief summer sun teaches gratitude. When the first rays of spring touch the snow, people still gather in silence, eyes closed, letting the warmth sink into their skin. It is not merely sunlight, it is resurrection. Every beam carries the promise that life always returns. Color has meaning too, though the palette of the Arctic seems limited. White is not emptiness, but totality, the sum of all colors. Black is not evil, but the womb of beginnings, where stars are born. Red, rare in the landscape, is sacred. It is life, blood, and memory. In some Inuit stories, the aurora's crimson streaks are the reflections of spirits playing drums in celebration of creation. To see red in the sky is to witness the universe remembering joy. Patterns of clothing, beadwork, and tattoos also tell stories older than words. Women once tattooed fine lines along their chin and forehead, marks called tunniet. They represented maturity, respect, and the endurance of pain. Each line echoed a specific tale: the first successful hunt, the passage into womanhood, the protection of ancestors. Missionaries tried to erase these marks, calling them pagan. But in recent years, Inuit women have revived the practice, reclaiming their heritage with quiet pride. They say each tattoo is a conversation with the past, a reminder that beauty, in the Arctic, is not decoration but declaration. The Sámi, too, encoded myth and art. Their drums bore concentric circles, suns, reindeer, and boats. When a no-Edi entered trance, he would interpret the drum's patterns as visions. To outsiders, it looked like ornament. To him, it was geography of the spirit. Even the smallest symbols, a spiral, a line, a dot, were coordinates for navigating between the seen and the unseen. In this world, nothing was arbitrary. A snowflake falling on one's hand could carry meaning. A sudden gust of wind might signal change. It created a consciousness where existence itself felt sentient. And perhaps that is what made the Arctic such fertile ground for myth. The awareness that every sound, every shape, every breath is part of a larger dialogue. Today, as scientists map the magnetic poles and catalog the biodiversity of tundra ecosystems, the old symbols remain, etched into tools, passed in lullabies, stitched into parkas. They are not relics, but reminders that long before humans wrote books, they wrote meaning into the world around them. The ice was their parchment, the stars their ink. And though much has melted, that language of snow and bone still whispers in the wind, waiting for those patient enough to listen. If myths are the memory of humanity, then the Arctic still remembers, quietly, steadily, beneath the noise of modernity. Even now, the old stories breathe through new forms, in words, in art, in sound, in science. They have not vanished, they have transformed. And like the aurora itself, they keep returning, each time with a different light. Many modern Arctic languages still carry within them traces of mythic thought. The Inuit word sila, for example, the breath of the world, remains a part of everyday speech. It can mean weather, atmosphere, mind, or even wisdom. When a hunter says, "Sila is angry today," he may be describing a storm, but he is also acknowledging consciousness in nature. That linguistic survival shows something profound, that even as technology replaces tradition, the worldview shaped by myth endures, hidden in the grammar of daily life. Across the circumpolar world, art and identity are being reborn from the fragments of these ancestral stories. In Greenland, young sculptors carve Sedna in soapstone, not as a goddess of the past, but as a symbol of environmental guardianship. Her hair, tangled with plastic waste and coral, has become an image of both beauty and warning. In Sámi communities of Norway and Finland, reindeer herders now compose joik songs for modern moments, about snowmobiles, lost landscapes, or satellite lights above the tundra. Yet they still use the same ancient melodic form that once invoked spirits. The melody remains circular, flowing without beginning or end, like the migration routes of their ancestors. Film and literature have also begun to rediscover the northern mythos. Inuit filmmakers tell stories where the line between realism and legend blurs seamlessly. Hunters hearing voices in ice, elders conversing with whales, children born with eyes that reflect the aurora. These films are not fantasies. They are acts of remembrance. They remind the world that indigenous storytelling has always been cinematic, rooted in rhythm, silence, and spectacle. Similarly, Sámi authors have reimagined the stalu as a symbol of colonial greed, a reminder of what happens when balance with nature is broken. Each reinterpretation carries the heartbeat of the original myth, adapted to modern wounds. Even language revival has taken on mythic resonance. In Canada and Alaska, schools once forbidden to teach native tongues now open each morning with traditional songs. Teachers describe it not as nostalgia, but as healing. To speak the words of one's ancestors is to restore a rhythm that colonization tried to silence. As one elder put it, each syllable is a spark of the old fire. When we speak it, the ice remembers. Tourists now flock to see the northern lights, chasing them with cameras and phones, unaware that they are chasing something far older than color. Yet in that collective awe, standing under green fire, breath fogging in silence, something ancient returns. People still gasp, still whisper, still point in reverence. They no longer call it Guafsahas or Ixarniat, but the instinct is the same, to look up and feel small, connected, and alive. Perhaps myth never leaves us. It simply changes vocabulary. Modern science, too, finds itself echoing the wisdom of the ancients in ways it never intended. When climate researchers speak of Earth systems and planetary feedback loops, they are, unknowingly, describing sila, the idea that air, water, and life share one breath. When biologists observe the self-regulation of Arctic ecosystems, they mirror old beliefs that the world punishes imbalance and rewards harmony. The vocabulary may be scientific, but the philosophy is timeless. Everything is connected. Everything responds. In art galleries from Reykjavik to Anchorage, the Arctic has become a muse once more. Artists paint in the pale hues of ice, sculpt in reindeer bone, compose symphonies inspired by the sound of wind over frozen plains. One installation in Tromsø recreated the sound of melting glaciers, accompanied by recordings of Sámi joiks, blending data and myth until they became indistinguishable. Visitors left in tears, not from despair, but from recognition. They heard, perhaps for the first time, the Arctic singing back. Festivals, too, keep the old rhythm alive. Every March, during the spring equinox, Sámi communities celebrate Bivi, the Sun Mother. Children release small mirrors into the snow to catch the first returning rays. Families gather around fires, offering milk and bread to the light, a custom older than any cathedral. In Greenland, drumming circles greet the sunrise after the long polar night, the steady beat symbolizing Sedna's heart as it awakens the sea. Even in modern cities, far from tundra and coast, these rituals continue, small but luminous acts of remembrance. And beyond the Arctic, echoes of its myths have seeped into global culture. Writers borrow its imagery, raven messengers, endless nights, gods of frost. Filmmakers reimagine the aurora as portals to other worlds, the ice as memory itself. Video games and novels set in frozen realms often unknowingly replicate Inuit and Sámi cosmologies, worlds without boundaries between human and nature, where light and shadow are living characters. The ancient archetypes persist, reshaped by pixels, but rooted in the same awe. Perhaps the most striking echo, however, is found in environmental movements. As the Arctic warms and ice vanishes, the myths have regained urgency. Activists invoke Sedna as a symbol of the wounded sea. The raven becomes a prophet of imbalance. The aurora, a call to humility. Protests are opened with songs to the land, ceremonies once dismissed as folklore. Now they are understood as philosophy, an ethics written in story. Because what these myths always taught, long before modern science confirmed it, is that the earth is alive, and it remembers. There is poetry in this return. The very technologies that once silenced indigenous voices now help spread them. A single Sámi joik can travel the globe in seconds, reaching listeners who have never felt northern wind. A story once told by lamplight in an igloo can now be streamed to millions. The digital world, for all its noise, has become another form of oral tradition, a modern campfire around which humanity still gathers to listen. And through it all, the Arctic continues to inspire that same paradoxical feeling it always has: isolation and connection, silence and song, death and rebirth. In the glare of screens and satellites, it might seem that we have moved beyond myth. But when the aurora rises above a frozen bay, when the wind sings through the bones of old settlements, when an elder begins a story with a long time ago, when the world was still new, something within us still responds. The myths never ended. We just changed the language of belief. In that sense, every retelling is an act of remembrance. Every listener becomes part of the lineage. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy of the Arctic myths. They do not demand worship, only attention. They remind us that even in a world of data and algorithms, wonder is still the oldest form of truth. The line between science and mythology is not as sharp as we once believed. Both begin with curiosity, the human need to understand what lies beyond the visible. In the Arctic, where the horizon is both infinite and featureless, imagination has always been a tool of survival. When early humans looked out over the ice and saw light dancing, or heard thunder beneath the sea, they sought meaning. Myth gave that meaning shape. Science, much later, gave it measurement. Yet the essence remained the same: to ask why the world behaves as it does, and what it means to belong to it. Archaeology has revealed that the first inhabitants of the far north were not isolated primitives, as once thought, but sophisticated navigators of both land and mind. Excavations in Siberia, Alaska, and Greenland show evidence of cultural exchange stretching back over 25,000 years. Stone tools, bone flutes, and symbolic carvings found thousands of miles apart share strikingly similar motifs: spirals, antlers, the sun and moon joined in a single disk. It suggests that early Arctic peoples were connected not only by migration routes, but by shared cosmology. These were the first cartographers of the invisible, mapping spirit through symbol long before satellites mapped ice. When scientists study the myth of Sedna today, they see more than poetry. They recognize encoded ecological knowledge. The tale of the Sea Mother teaches sustainable hunting, warns against overfishing, and links emotional balance to environmental health. For millennia, such myths served as the Arctic's unwritten laws, evolutionary ethics disguised as storytelling. What modern ecology now phrases as the interconnectedness of systems, the Inuit expressed as a goddess's sorrow. Sedna's tears, they said, could raise storms. And so they learned restraint. In this way, mythology was not superstition. It was science with a soul. Anthropologists studying the concept of sila, the breath of the world, have noted how it mirrors modern climate science. Air, weather, and consciousness are one. Changes in the atmosphere reflect changes in behavior. In a literal sense, the Inuit were early climatologists. Their oral histories record centuries of weather patterns, ocean currents, and animal migrations. what they described as the mood of the wind, researchers now measure as jet streams and barometric shifts. Myth and meteorology, it turns out, are simply two dialects of the same observation. Psychologists, too, have begun to reinterpret Arctic mythology through the lens of human consciousness. Carl Jung once proposed that myths arise from the collective unconscious, shared symbols that help civilizations navigate inner and outer extremes. The Arctic, with its stark contrasts of light and darkness, becomes the perfect metaphor for the psyche itself. Consciousness and shadow, creation and dissolution. The story of Sedna may speak not only of ecological balance, but of emotional healing, the need to face betrayal, descend into darkness, and emerge transformed. The aurora, endlessly chasing itself across the sky, mirrors the cycles of thought and renewal. And the eternal reindeer, moving between worlds, embodies the mind's journey through memory and dream. Even geology plays its part in the mythic landscape. For centuries, legend spoke of warm lands hidden under the ice, places where forgotten peoples still thrived. When modern researchers began drilling ice cores in Greenland and Antarctica, they discovered layers of trapped air dating back hundreds of thousands of years. Inside those frozen bubbles were traces of ancient climates, proof that the poles were once far warmer, even forested. In a way, the myths were right. The ice does remember. It carries the memory of green valleys and open seas, a world before the freeze. Some theories even suggest that ancient Arctic myths may encode memories of cataclysmic events. The recurring theme of floods and disappearing lands, echoing across Inuit, Chukchi, and Norse traditions, aligns eerily with the end of the last ice age, when melting glaciers raised sea levels by hundreds of feet. Is it possible that what we call myth began as eyewitness testimony, stories told by survivors of global transformation? If so, then legend is not the opposite of history, but its oldest record, spoken in metaphor instead of measurement. Astronomy, too, finds kinship in these northern tales. The obsession with light and motion, the personification of the sun and moon, the reverence for polar constellations, all reflect keen observation of celestial mechanics. The Arctic sky, unpolluted and vast, offered early humans a clock and a compass. The cycles of the aurora, the tilt of shadows at solstice, the phases of the moon, each became both data and divinity. Even the idea of gods chasing one another across the heavens mirrors planetary orbits. In their poetry, the ancients captured what astrophysicists would later chart with equations. Modern neuroscience adds yet another layer of resonance. Studies show that extreme environments, polar nights, long isolation, auroral light, can profoundly affect human perception. Prolonged darkness can alter serotonin levels, while exposure to the auroras, shifting light stimulates the brain's visual cortex in unique ways, sometimes producing feelings of awe or transcendence. In short, the Arctic naturally induces states that traditional cultures might call spiritual. The shamans who spoke with wind and stars may have been tuning into real neurochemical experiences that science is only now learning to describe. The convergence of these insights has sparked a quiet revolution in anthropology. Scholars no longer dismiss Arctic mythology as quaint folklore. Instead, they recognize it as a sophisticated framework for understanding ecology, psychology, and physics, all expressed through story. Each legend becomes a data point, each song a record of observation. The myths, far from primitive, reveal a deep systems intelligence, one that modern civilization, in its rush toward abstraction, may have forgotten. Yet for all this newfound respect, something remains elusive. Science can explain the mechanism of the aurora, the evolution of belief, the migration of peoples across ice, but it cannot replicate the feeling of standing beneath that living sky, of hearing the wind hum through an ancient drum. It can measure wonder, but not create it. That, perhaps, is why myth endures. It fills the space between knowledge and meaning, the place where data ends and awe begins. The Inuit elders often say that the world speaks most clearly when it is silent. In that silence, myth and science meet, not as rivals, but as reflections of the same search. One names the forces that move the earth. The other reminds us why they matter. Together, they form the twin compass of human understanding, truth and story, reason and reverence, logic and light. And if there is a lesson the Arctic still offers, it is this. The universe does not demand that we choose between knowing and believing. It invites us to do both, to measure the stars, and then to sing to them. The Arctic has always been a mirror, one that shows not just the world, but ourselves. Its stories, carved in bone and whispered through wind, do not belong to the past. They belong to time itself. And though centuries have melted and civilizations have come and gone, the ice still holds the voices that once shaped it. When you stand beneath the northern sky and hear the crack of frost, it is not silence you hear. It is memory breaking open. Every civilization, no matter how far from the poles, carries some version of the same longing, the need to understand where we come from and where we are going. For the Arctic peoples, that understanding was never abstract. It was lived, breathed, hunted, and sung. Their myths were not stories to escape reality. They were maps to survive within it. And in an age where technology promises control over nature, those ancient lessons feel more urgent than ever. The world they described, a living earth that feels, remembers, and responds, now returns to us in the language of science. We call it climate change, but they might have called it Sedna's anger. We speak of carbon cycles. They spoke of the breath of Sila. The translation is different, but the message is the same. When we forget our place within the balance, the world corrects us. In that sense, myth was never wrong. It was just written in a dialect of reverence. Perhaps that is why these stories continue to move us. They remind us that knowledge without humility is incomplete, that wisdom is not only what we can prove, but what we choose to respect. In the Arctic, respect is everything. The hunter bows to the sea before the hunt. The child thanks the snow before stepping upon it. The elder greets the first sunrise as if it were a returning friend. Such gestures may seem small, but they contain an understanding that modern civilization often forgets. Survival is not conquest, it is relationship. When archaeologists uncover ancient tools from beneath melting glaciers, they are not just finding artifacts. They are uncovering continuity. A carved amulet, a drum, a line of tattooed dots. Each is a frozen sentence in humanity's oldest language. They tell us that wonder is not a luxury. It is a form of memory. To believe that the wind has a spirit or that the sea listens is to remain aware that we are never truly alone. And perhaps that awareness, the humility of being part of something vast, is what the modern world hungers for most. As the ice retreats, new landscapes appear. Valleys that haven't seen the sun in tens of thousands of years. Forests reborn from ancient seed. Scientists study them for data. But poets and elders might say the earth is remembering how to breathe again. In that reawakening lies a question that transcends time. If the Arctic can renew itself after ages of silence, can humanity do the same? Can we remember the old agreements, to take only what we need, to listen before we speak, to see beauty not as possession but as participation? When modern explorers travel north, many describe an inexplicable sensation, the feeling of being watched, of being known. It is not fear but recognition, as if the land itself remembers them. That sensation may have a scientific name, sensory adaptation, environmental awe, but in the language of myth, it is the greeting of Sila. It is the earth whispering, "You are still part of me." And so, the Arctic myths endure because they do not simply explain. They invite. They invite us to listen, to imagine, to remember that the world is not an object to be measured, but a presence to be met. They remind us that time is not a line but a circle, always returning, always renewing. They ask us gently to live as if the future were watching, as if our footprints will one day become someone else's legend. When the final sun of winter slips below the horizon and the first aurora begins its quiet dance, the people of the north still look up and fall silent. They do not worship. They remember. Each color that moves across the heavens is a sentence in a language older than fire. It says that loss and beauty are twins, that the world will forgive, but not forget, that everything, light, wind, story, soul, is connected by the same breath. And maybe that is the true hidden civilization of the Arctic. Not a city buried under ice, not a lost kingdom or secret race, but an unbroken thread of understanding, a culture of reverence, a science of empathy. a wisdom carved in cold and carried through centuries of night. It lives wherever someone still listens to the wind and hears more than sound. It lives wherever someone still believes that even the quietest place can speak. In the end, the Arctic does not need to be rediscovered. It needs to be remembered, because its greatest secret was never buried beneath the ice. It was buried within us, the part that still looks at the sky and feels the universe looking back.